One thing before we get started. This episode contains strong language, so please use discretion. Hi, I'm Emma Clarke, and this is Before the Bar Opens, the podcast about what happens before the music starts. I talk to people who make, use, and love music. The Multi-Story Orchestra is more than just an orchestra. It's a community of professional musicians and young people who create extraordinary performances, tell stories, and unleash creativity. The orchestra performs in car parks and unexpected spaces. The players bring powerful and meaningful music to life and believe creating the best art means involving and valuing absolutely everybody. Since their first performance in Peckham 10 years ago, they've performed across the UK and broadcast the first ever BBC Proms performance in a car park. The New York Times says they play heroically, they play loudly, and they'll play anything. The response was ecstatic, and it deserved to be. I spoke to artistic director, composer, and co-founder of the Multi-Story Orchestra, Kate Whitley. I wanted to find out, as the Times has suggested, if the future of music is emerging in a municipal car park. What is the Multi-Story Orchestra?
So it basically came from the idea of what happens if you take classical music out of a concert hall and the kinds of spaces that it is normally played in. That's something that we've messed around with in different ways over the years. Back when I was a teenager, I used to do it. I used to go and play in pubs and things like that and just see if it could be different. I grew up playing the piano and always just hated the kind of places. It's always done in
the
such...
formality
of exactly.
It, maybe.
It's always such formal spaces. I remember doing piano exams. You sit on stage and you have someone sat on the other end of the room marking you. And it never feels like the right place to be making music. I always found that so off-putting. So that was kind of the idea behind it, was there other places that you could go into and how would that change how it felt and how you communicate with people, I think, is the main thing. You feel so separate from an audience when you're on a formal stage.
There's a physical divide, isn't there, between the performers and the audience?
Exactly.
And it can feel like a gulf, a cultural gulf.
And those spaces are set up to be like that. That's the purpose of them.
And there's kind of a reverential quality, there's a cathedral-like quality to some concert halls where, I don't know, it's almost like there's an expected deference to the music somehow.
Yeah, completely.
I get, but it does set up this sort of, I don't know, this inaccessibility.
I think it's not that sort of focused listening is amazing. It's so cool that happens. That's the good thing about it. But the problem is that happens by default. That happens because it has to happen. And there's something, I remember we always do projects where we have loads of young people come and perform with the orchestra and they make a big choir and you have them and then you have the huge orchestra. And I remember a kid who sang in that saying to me, because the audience are so loud, right? It's really chaotic and noisy. And then when they come on to sing, everyone goes really quiet. And I remember this kid saying to me that because everyone was so loud but then went so quiet, it made it feel like what they were going to do on stage was really, really important, which is so true. It was such a good way to put it. And because that silence is not expected, it's not how there's not a set way to behave in that space. If everyone does go quiet like that, it feels like a really amazing thing.
And how was it when you were playing in pubs, when you were playing your piano in a totally different informal setting where people could really, I guess, choose whether to listen or not, choose whether to engage or not? What was that like for you as a performer? And then how do you think the people in the pub perceive the music? How was it different?
Mixed. Often they were disastrous. I've got loads of disaster stories. It was definitely playing around with it in different spaces to see what works.
Yeah, it's all an experiment, isn't it? It's a learning curve.
Yeah, which was fun. I remember people that I'd got to come and play and stuff like that, and they would come and do it and it would be a complete disaster. And they'd be like, well, I'm glad I did this because it's made me really appreciate what's nice about playing in a concert hall.
Yes, yeah.
So it took a long time to kind of work out how to do it, because I think the point is not... People always misconceive that the point is that the audience is just really noisy and doesn't pay attention, which is not the point at all. In fact, like I was saying about that kid who said it made it seem like it was really important. If you get it right, people are quieter than they are in a concert hall because they pay attention because they want to be there and they want to hear it, not because that's just how you automatically behave.
Yes, totally. Was there a single moment that inspired you to set up Multi-Story Orchestra? Was it a kind of thunderbolt realisation where you thought, I have to do this? Or was it an evolution of ideas?
I'd say probably an evolution, but there was like one night that I did when I was probably 20 or something, and it worked so well. I just remember everyone, it was in a little pub and everyone was like crammed in. And I just remember the audience being so totally transfixed. It was such an amazing atmosphere. And that was definitely a point in which I thought this could work.
What were you playing?
Do you know Stravinsky, Rite of Spring?
Yes, I do.
There's like a piano four-hand version of that, and we played that. And seeing that up close is so physical, especially in the version with two people and one piano, because it's like two people battling over the piano. It's absolutely mental. So that
God, I'd love to see that.
It's
Kate.
really good. Yeah, you should watch out for it.
Oh, wow. I didn't even know you could do Rite of Spring on the piano with two players. That's amazing.
And that's the sort of thing that if you have that on a faraway concert hall stage, I think you don't get the impact of it anywhere near as much as you would when you're like way up close. So much of it is that proximity.
So who makes up the orchestra? What kind of players do you attract?
So it's people who freelance with other orchestras. So a lot of them generally will play with like more traditional ensembles the rest of the time. Yeah, they'll do like a total mixture of work. So people who do kind of conventional concerts, who teach, who do creative stuff, who make their own things. It's like, yeah, it's a mixture. It's pretty much all freelance players, so not people that have like a full-time job with one orchestra, but who play with lots of different places and sort of mix it up.
So is it mostly professional players that work with you?
So we work with professionals and non-professionals. So it will be professional, like classical musicians, and then young people from schools who either play or sing or don't do either and do it for the first time with us. And what we do is bring those people together and we create all together as a group. So we do play a lot of music that is already pre-written, but we also do projects where everything that we play is created by the people in the project.
Wow. So they have total ownership over it.
Yeah, exactly.
Can't wait to come and see you play.
Yeah, you definitely
Sounds awesome.
Because of weather in car parks, it's like spring, summer only, pretty much. We do things across the rest of the year. So we did one in a sports centre in November. But generally it will be like May to September.
How big is the orchestra? Is it a full orchestra?
It varies. So the biggest we've done has been up to 100 people.
That's a lot of people.
It's loads, yeah. So if you do some of the like big classical orchestral stuff, it's absolutely huge. We did a prom. We did two shows actually that the BBC broadcast on Radio 3 as part of the proms. And the second one of those I think was nearly 100. Yeah, it can go really big. It can also go probably like 15, I'd say, is the smallest we've done. We have done smaller stuff as well, but not in the big car park spaces. A lot of it is about scale. It kind of only works in those places if it's big. So I think like probably around 30 is like the sort of standard size, but it really varies.
Where do you perform?
There is a place in Peckham. It's run by an arts organisation called Bold Tendencies. And that's our like home. That's where we play regularly. We also play a lot in Gloucester. There's a theatre company there called Strikerlight who started doing a festival actually in Gloucester Town Centre car park. So those are the two places that we've played regularly. But we've done one-off ones around the country. So we did one in Birmingham, around a car park in Birmingham with like an amazing acoustic. We've done them in Ipswich a few times, in East Riding in Yorkshire a couple of times.
How do you organise a gig? Because I imagine there are lots of logistical considerations that when I start to think about it, Kate, it starts to blow my mind a bit, actually. So talk me through it. How do you do it?
There's just so many little things like clearance heights. For getting things up, you can only use a standard transit. Anything bigger won't fit, which then is really annoying for getting big things up there. So you've got to get in staging, some kind of audience seating. Maybe you need to put in lights. You might need to bring up a generator, that sort of stuff. It really depends on the space. Some spaces will be really well laid out and will have good lighting, so you don't have to worry about a lot of it. But it really varies. Sometimes you've got to bring like everything in.
Do you do like a recce beforehand and sort of test it out for acoustics and as you say, electricity? And
it's really fun. One of my favourite bits of my job is if we're going to a city we haven't been to before, you get to do a day going around like all the car parks trying to choose the best one. It's so good. And there's always like a building manager or something who you get to meet when you go in. It's like the most exciting thing that's happened for them. They're like, you really want to come here and do a concert? It's so nice.
How fantastic is that, going on a nationwide tour of car parks?
I know.
That's
I've
just
always
awesome.
thought that we should get NCP and National Car Parks to sponsor us.
I was literally about to say that.
We got close. We did one in, I think it was in Ipswich with an NCP car park, and they were keen, but then it sort of petered out. But yeah, I always thought that would be totally ideal. There's a magazine called Parking Review, which is...
Parking Review?
Yeah, it's like the magazine of car parks, and we're so often on the front cover.
I love the idea of an orchestra playing in a public space, the surprise of that. What must it sound like from outside? I like to think of people hearing it, moving towards it, catching the music on the wind, and discovering a wonderful orchestra playing on level 9. Tell me about your audiences. Who comes to watch?
So it's a mix, and it depends what we put on, what it is. So the best audiences we get, the most mixed audiences, have been when we've done stuff that is like co-made with local young people, that is them working with the orchestra and them saying what they want to make. When you do that, you get a really amazing mix. You get people who just have never come to anything like that before, who come because their family or like close links are in it, and also because those people have so much ownership of it that they're really invested in getting people to come. So that's kind of one audience base. There's also just like press coverage, and then like it will be on, I don't know, like some local radio station, and people who just hear it and think like, that sounds weird, I want to go and see that. Just completely taking a punt on something.
Yeah.
That sort of
Do you
audience.
get kind of random people from the locality who hear it?
That also happens, yeah. You also get people who are trying to park. That's one of my favourites.
I'm sorry to laugh.
No, I really
can just
enjoy that.
imagine.
Yeah, it's really good.
So when young people create this music with you, what kind of music is it? What kind of themes do they want to work with?
A mixture. So sometimes we've done stuff where we've set the theme. We've done a lot of stuff about climate change. That's always such an important thing to get them to think about, and always has so much like creative. It's a great creative stimulus because there's so much you can do out of it, and it's so relevant to everyone. A couple of years ago, a group of kids came to us saying they wanted to make a piece about gang culture. They'd had a kid from that school killed in a knife fight. And they started making something themselves, actually, and then they asked me to come to their school concert to see it and said, could the orchestra work with us to make this into a bigger thing, which we did. And that was great, because that wasn't even us suggesting something, that was like completely their theme, and also something that was so important to them and really needed telling.
That's powerful stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It was a really amazing project.
How do you plan a programme of music for a car park concert? What music do you select, and why do you choose those particular pieces?
Well, I guess the thing about creating something is that you don't select it, actually. You talk to who you're working with and see what they want to make. And I've tried to move more towards doing stuff like that. Otherwise, try and pick stuff that will work acoustically in the space. They vary in acoustic quite a lot, but generally light and delicate stuff doesn't work that well. It's better, loud percussion-y stuff will work better. But it really, really depends. Like some spaces just have a great acoustic and you can really do anything.
I'm just picturing a car park now. I'm imagining I'm on one of the floors of a multi-story car park. Where do you set up?
We'll try and go for the floor one below the roof, which is good because you get that feeling of being up high, which is really nice. You feel a bit separate from the world, but it's more separate from background noise and that kind of thing. It just makes it feel really special. But it needs to be covered for acoustics, so it's not on the roof. And
for weather.
Yeah, exactly.
Presumably.
Exactly, yeah.
You don't want a tuba filling with rainwater, do you?
We did one in Gloucester a few years ago, and the car park was slightly on its last legs, and it pissed with rain, and it all came dribbling through the cracks and through the roof. It was really bad, and I had like violinists starting to put their feet, sitting up on their chairs, looking at me, looking terrified, and I was like, okay, we might have to move this. Luckily, we stopped the rehearsal, and luckily then the rain stopped and the sun came out really beautifully just before the concert.
Oh, it's a symbol.
Exactly, yeah, exactly.
I asked Alison Spire, marketing manager of our proud sponsor Alexander Knight & Co., the accountants for entrepreneurs, how she uses music in her everyday life. At the end of a long day, what music do you love to listen to?
Well, I have quite a niche interest. I love musical theatre and just play musical numbers, because that's my ideal wind down. Having just been to see Everybody Loves Jamie, it has to be a number from that.
Do you sing?
Yes, unashamedly loud and proud, and not very well.
Do you sing in the shower?
Absolutely.
What do you sing?
Usually always a musical number, depending on what I'm feeling at the time. Obviously, you've got the background noise of the water and being far away from everybody else, so literally nobody can hear. But yeah, absolutely. Sing in the shower, sing in the car, sing in the kitchen.
Big thanks to Alexander Knight & Co, the accountants for entrepreneurs. For the best tax advice, email hello@alexanderknightaccountants.co.uk and find out how much you and your business can save. Specifically, what pieces do you love to play with the orchestra?
The stuff that we've made ourselves is the best stuff. And I think everyone plays best when it's that as well. And that project we did with the young people, when it was something that they brought to us and that so much mattered to them, I think that's the stuff that is best to play.
Do you play anything from the classical canon?
Yeah, we do. We've done loads. We did that Stravinsky that I used to do the piano version of. We've done the orchestra version of that, which is like 100 people. That sort of stuff works really well. The big percussion-y things sound amazing in there. We have done Mozart, Beethoven. Like Mozart, it gets a bit more lost, but if you get big rhythmic Beethoven stuff, that can sound really amazing.
A kind of maximalist, more bombastic kind of sound, I'm guessing, would work really well in a car park.
It's a shame because it's a bit of a cliche, but it does actually sound better. And especially the sort of brass sound bouncing off concrete just sounds really incredible.
What happens to the sound? Do you get like weird overtones happening in that kind of space?
No, you don't get that, but it does just have a slightly different sound quality because it is bouncing off concrete, not off wood or whatever else. It's a sound that you don't hear
anywhere else.
Yeah, exactly.
Unless you're in a car park.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. What's the most memorable thing that's happened during one of your concerts?
When we did a prom, so it was like broadcast on Radio 3, someone was cutting their hedge in a garden just across the road and it was so loud. And I think actually someone from the BBC went down to ask her not to do it and she was really pissed off.
No way.
There was lots of stories like that, but that's like an example.
Because I guess doing concerts in car parks, having extraneous noises, sirens, car horns,
the whole time.
Engine, you're obviously immersed in that environment, an urban environment. So you're going to have a lot of bleed through from the outside world, which I think situates the music really powerfully.
It's something that pretty much every year something like that happens and I think, oh my God, what the hell are we doing? I remember doing a site visit with the BBC and the Radio 3 engineers came down to do the space, and just as we got up to the top, a massive freight train went past. There's a train line right by the car park there. Yeah. And it was so loud, we couldn't talk. It obliterated everything. Yeah. And they looked at each other and they were clearly like, why are we here?
Yeah. But that's kind of the point as well, isn't it?
It totally is. Pretty much every time someone comes and says to me, oh, my favourite bit was when the train went past and it was so beautiful because it just made everything feel real. And it does. It's kind of more moving because it feels, like you say, situated. It feels like it is in the real world. And I think there is something more beautiful about that than something that is totally separate.
That's so powerful. It's almost like it recontextualises the music.
Yeah, exactly.
In a real, tangible situation where people live. Do you know what I mean? We don't live in concert halls. We don't go about our daily business in concert halls. In a car park, we're rushing from A to B. We're transient. We're doing something that's important to us or we feel obliged to do for one reason or another. It's like it's a little milestone in our day, isn't it, when we go to a car park? Because we've achieved something, we're about to go somewhere, or thank God that's over, I'm going home.
Yeah, completely.
But just to have music in that space, I've got to come to one of your concerts because I think that's so powerful, actually, to reinterpret music.
I think you would really enjoy it. Some people just don't really get it. It's like a Marmite thing.
Kate's whole ethos resonates with me. Why should classical music only be heard in a concert hall setting with a quiet, deferential audience? I love that the Multi-Story Orchestra is challenging norms and pushing back against convention, because a convention only ever becomes a convention by consent, right? Now, you're an acclaimed composer. How do you feel when you hear your work being performed?
So this is like the other side of what I do, and it's weird because you spend so much of that is spent just sat on your own in your room writing music.
I know.
It's
really
mad.
odd, isn't it?
Yeah. And then at the end of that, you suddenly get, it's normally like a couple of days or something, that suddenly everyone comes together and you have these massive rehearsals and then you have the show, which is always pretty overwhelming. And it's just hard to line up just the hours and hours that you spend working on something completely by yourself. It's such a different job when you're suddenly in the room and processing it happening in real time and all the things you've got to sort. But yeah, it's really fun. I always really enjoy it.
That process between being alone with what you're creating and then putting it out to a group of people who are going to actually realise it for you.
Yeah.
That's an alchemical process, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're working with the base material on your own in your little... I mean, I'm speaking from experience here.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been self-isolating and socially distanced for decades and nobody's noticed. But you're on your own, neck deep in the stuff that you're making.
Yeah, exactly.
And then there comes a point where you have to share it with someone. And it's at that point when I'm sort of sharing it with somebody for the first time. That's the bit I find just bowel-clenchingly terrifying.
I think it does actually get easier. I've had a lot of people say it doesn't, but I do think that the more you do it, I don't know what your experience of that is, but I feel like it's got easier the more I've done it.
For me, because I'm very new to this, is finding the way to communicate with musicians coherently about what I want, what my vision is for a piece, in a way that is unself-conscious, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it is just practice. And it is also, I found it really helpful doing stuff with young people who aren't professional musicians, because you get loads of really honest feedback, which is actually...
and spontaneous, real responses.
Yeah, completely. Whereas if you write something for a professional orchestra, they'll like sort of smile and nod, or maybe not even smile, just get on with it. You don't really get anything. Whereas if you write something like the first stuff that I wrote for kids to sing, you knew immediately which bits of the piece were less good, because it was the stuff that they didn't pay attention and pissed around for. They'll tell you. They'll ask, why does this happen again? It's boring, or whatever. Like, you get that feedback from them. It was a really good lesson in writing stuff better, but it was also a good lesson in communicating, because if you've got to communicate with them, you have to communicate so clearly. You can't get away with anything.
How has it changed your compositional approach then? Has it changed it?
I think it's mainly made it clearer. A good example is, like, I think I often used to just repeat something, but then not repeat it exactly the same because you kind of thought maybe you shouldn't. I don't know, that's just something that when you get taught composition or do like classical music, you're taught that kind of thing. But actually, it doesn't really make any difference. Just repeat something exactly the same. It's not, it's fine.
Because people quite like that, I think, because it helps orient them in a piece, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. That's the sort of thing. There's just lots of stuff that I think you end up thinking you should do that actually you don't need to. So it's a really good way to cut through some of that and really think about how something comes across. I think it just makes it clearer, and it makes you think about what you really need as well. Like writing stuff for young instrumentalists for the first time, and I was trying to work out parts for them, and then it made me really think, like, do I need these notes? Are these notes up here like really doing something, or have I just put them in for the sake of it? And I was like, actually, it doesn't make any difference if you get rid of them. It's easy to write by just sticking loads of stuff on the page and filling it in and being like, okay, it's done. But actually, this sort of process forces you to really, really think about what's there and why, and what really matters for the music to work. That is so helpful. I really think it's one of the best ways to learn how to compose.
Yes, because you're kind of looking at the scaffolding of a piece.
Exactly, yeah. And I find it so annoying so often that people think it's a limitation. Like, I remember the first time I wrote something for young people, and I took it to I went to Cambridge University, so it's like a really conservative way of thinking about music, and my old professor there looked at it and he was like, well, it's very noble of you to have done this.
Oh my Lord.
I know, I was so pissed off, and I was like, no, this taught me fucking loads. This is where I learned something. It's like that. There's so many assumptions and arrogance involved in that way of thinking. If you grow up getting trained in classical music, that is an environment you're taught in. That's the environment you're brought up in. Even now, I still find it. Those are kind of the voices in your head, right? If you like grow up, if you go to university like that, or grow up doing music lessons from that kind of person, somewhere in your head, those voices are there, and it's hard. It takes a long time to get away from it.
Do you think you have?
I think I'm sure there's still loads of ways that I haven't, that I'm like constantly questioning myself and trying to, but I think it's an ongoing process.
It feels like listening to you and your musical journey, it feels like you're wanting to push back a lot.
Yeah.
And push against constraints and push against perceived norms and push against prejudice.
Which is, it's annoying. Like, it would be so much nicer to do something that could feel just positive.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get that.
It feels like, I hate that so much of it feels like a pushback. And yeah, I mean, I've thought about just like not working in classical music at all to not have to deal with that. But I think like there's so much money and resource that goes into it. Yeah. It's worth fighting that battle to try and get some of that to be redirected, or to question some of the reasons why so much does go into it.
All the show notes for this episode are available in the description, and there's a bunch more stuff at beforethebaropens.com. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, just take your pick. Before the Bar Opens is created by me, Emma Clarke, and is produced by Rick Watson. I compose the theme music we use on Before the Bar Opens, and you can hear the full piece on our website, beforethebaropens.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave us a review, hopefully a lovely one, and tell your friends. Another episode will be along very soon, so don't miss it. Thanks for listening.